So, on to the first panel of day two, on to the Sunday. I'm very pleased to welcome back Steve, who shared his time and expertise yesterday, but also welcoming Sally and Ade, who are going to be additionally sharing their stories about how they got into comics, whatever that means. Now, one thing I learned yesterday is that it's perhaps better to let people introduce themselves in their own words. So, Steve, if you could kick us off, could you give everyone a little reminder, or for our new arrivals, explain a little bit about who you are and what you do?
So I'm Steve. I'm creatively, I'm the writer of Flintlock, which is an ongoing anthology series all set in the 18th century. But I also have a different hat as an editor, a publisher with Time Bomb Comics, so I publish other people's work as well.
Thanks. Sally?
I'm a freelance writer and artist. I mostly work in comics, but I do a little bit of other illustration work as well in the museum sector and variously whatever I can get my hands on.
And I'm, I guess, comic book artist. Well, it's kind of, I'm in a weird place at the moment, but I've been doing freelance illustration since I was 15, but comics have always been my main passion, so it's kind of, that's why I'm here.
So, I mean, Ade, to kind of build on that, you say you've been doing this for a while. I mean, what's your kind of current situation as a kind of veteran? What are you either working on at the moment or working towards?
So I'm working on a graphic novel series set during the next ice age. So it's a sci-fi horror with lots of weird quantum mechanic-y things going on. And I primarily like to work with pencil, but I kind of mix it up with digital colour as well.
Thank you. And Sally, you're also appearing on our freelancer panel later today, and I should say thank you for stepping in at the last minute to replace Anna, who sadly couldn't be here today. But I mean, what's your current working situation? What are you working on or around?
So it's a mix. So over the last, as an example, maybe I'll do over the last sort of year or so, I spent sort of a good few months early last year on a museum display project on natural history. So I drew like 145 plants and animals, enormous files to be blown up at like 2 meters. And then from there, I spent a few months writing and drawing Under the Oak Trees, which is a drama romance for fresh romance. And then from that, I went on to the graphic novel I've just finished, which was with Liam Moore and John Lock, called Conspiracy of Ravens, and that's kind of a middle grade sort of fantasy adventure that's coming out in October. So it's kind of it's very varied. You pursue your own interests, but you also kind of take whatever comes along that seems interesting as well.
Steve, what's on your plate at the moment?
Oh, my plates are full at the minute. At the moment, I've got the third Flintlock book being printed right this weekend, so I'm expecting delivery of that on Tuesday, and then they'll all be sent out Wednesday to all the people that supported it on the pre-order on the Kickstarter. So I'm really pleased to get to that point. I've got a Kickstarter running live at the minute, which is called Defiant, which is written by Andy Winter, and it's been illustrated by Daniel Bell and Joseph Tomic, and it's a 96-page graphic novel about Vikings, and it's all to do with the Battle of Maldon that took place in Essex over 1,000 years ago, and it's one of the great British historical mysteries, because all that's known about the battle is a 325-line poem, an Anglo-Saxon poem, which tells how the battle, what caused the battle, how it started, but it doesn't tell how it ended. So the story tells the full story of the battle. So that's there live now at the moment. So please check it out. It's always good to have an opportunity for a plug, John.
Good plug.
We're not above shameless plugs when required.
At the same time, I'm in the middle of writing Flintlock Book 4, which is going to be out next year. I'm doing final art reviews and edits on a horror anthology I've got coming out in September. I'm also receiving pencils and making suggested changes to a penciler for a one-shot book I've got coming out next year, and I'm hard editing a script by Katie Cunningham, who's doing a graphic novel for us, which again will probably be out towards the tail end of next year. So a number of things that are going on.
Keeping busy by the sound of it, and I'm sure it's always nice to be busy when it's hotter than the surface of the sun outside as well. Sally, just as a talking point, I'm wondering, can you remember, it seems like we've had a lot of people talking about their experiences, and there comes a point in seemingly everyone's life in comics where they remember, if not the first comic they read, but the first comic that made an impact on them. And I'm wondering if there was a kind of touchstone moment for you.
Yeah, I mean, I did grow up sort of wanting to. Comics were one of my sort of childhood things because I grew up in South Africa, so we didn't get a lot of British media, but we did get Archie comics, and we got some of the European comics, so like Archie, Tintin, Asterix, Lucky Luke, sort of etc. So I grew up wanting to like draw for Disney or Archie comics, or be a marine biologist, not picky, and but that's kind of just like when you're a kid, your ideas are quite generalized. So that wasn't really kind of thinking about what comics can do. And then when I was a teenager, I moved to Canada, and that was right around the time when a decent amount of manga was first getting translated. And I think that happened in Canada sort of maybe about 5 years ahead of here. And that was the first time that I kind of came across the idea that comics could do absolutely anything. And that was the first time I encountered comics that were very, very quiet, sort of not action-oriented at all. Like there's one called Aria that was getting published at the time by Kozue Amano, which is just about like a kind of new Venice that's been settled on Mars, and it follows gondolier. There we go. I was like, I've forgotten the word. The person who goes like this, a gondolier, like in training on this new Venice. But literally every chapter is like very standalone, and it's very much just about her discovering, because she's just moved there, discovering the place that she lives in. Often there's absolutely no conflict at all. It's literally just ends with her like discovering a new corner of the city that she hadn't seen before, and it has a beautiful view, and that's really cool. And I had never seen comics doing things like that before, so that was definitely kind of the point where I kind of went, this is like, if I was going to make something, this is the kind of thing I would want to make.
I do love the phrase quiet comics. It's rare that you hear something and it clicks so well in your head and go like, oh yeah, I get entirely what you mean
exactly
by that.
What you mean,
Yeah.
right?
Ade, is there a similar kind of inspirational moment for you?
I've had quite an eclectic range of influences, ranging from kind of Marvel UK's Transformers, which I collected tons of that. But also Sagi Yojimbo by Stan Sakai, which was probably my first graphic novel. I was about 12 years old, and we used to go up to central London almost every other weekend, and literally would just go to the comic shops and then trainer shops. But yeah, it's like, that was probably my first graphic novel encounter, and absolutely loved it. It was so well written and kind of crafted. There was humour, and it was very simplistic as well. And I think I had a greater appreciation of just black and white artwork at that point. But then there's, other influences, Aliens, Predators, stuff like that. And then, it kind of then swung literally into manga. Lots of stuff by Masamune Nishiro, so like Appleseed, Akira, massive influence. Yukito Kishiro's Battle Angel Alita. Yeah.
Do you think that Transformers love kind of carried forward? I'm sensing like a kind of machinery kind of theme across a lot.
Definitely. It's kind of that weird thing. I have my love of art comes from my mum, and my love of technology comes from my dad. And yet neither of them kind of like the opposite things. It's weird. But I kind of grew up around engine parts and things like that, so it's kind of, I've always loved machines, robots, science fiction, weird ways to blow things up. No, so
I feel that could actually be the subtitle of comics as a genre. It's just weird ways to blow things up. Steve, I mean, jumping on the idea of like inspiration, can you think of the moment when, it's going to sound an odd thing to say, but can you remember when you realised that comics were made by people?
Yes. I think it would have been in 1975, because that's how old I am. I saw an advert on TV for the very first issue of Battle Picture Weekly, and when I've always had comics bought for me before, but that was the comic something I wanted to read, so I started getting that comic, and I'm sure that there were credits in there, and I'm sure it was done like a little hand grenade, I think. So it looked like a little hand grenade, like a stylized hand grenade with writer artist. And I'm sure that was the point where I realised that different people actually made these things. And it was also the first time I started recognising different artist styles. And the first artist that I remember recognising his style to the point where I could walk into the newsagents, because this didn't have comic shops then, and see his artwork on the cover, and they were on things like summer specials, was Ian Kennedy. So that was the first person I remember thinking, oh, this is man, he must do this. So that was the first time I remember making the connection that these weren't just kind of like magical things that just appeared in the newsagent. But I think it was the second major point then was in 1979 when Des Skin was running Marvel UK. And he did this thing called the Marvel Revolution, which was basically trying to revive interest in the Marvel reprint weeklies. So he kind of transformed the kind of formats of all the weekly comics, and compressed them. And really now in hindsight, it's a terrible thing to do because he was chopping the art to bits, and he was fitting 4 or 5 pages of American comic art onto a single page, and there was 20, 30 panels a page. Now looking back, it was a nightmare, but at the time it was just like wow, because there was just so much content. But also as part of that whole thing, and which Marvel always were known to do, they would highlight the fact that they were creators behind the comics, because they would give them the nicknames and this kind of stuff. So that was then when it really became that moment. Oh, okay, these are the personalities, these are the people that I want to know more about. But also, these are the kind of people I would aspire to be. Those were the two moments, I think.
It feels like you break it down from thinking comics are magic and also a little weird. I feel for me personally, there's always been an odd moment where I thought comics aren't normal or mainstream. There's something weird and kind of illicit and exciting about them. And then you realise, oh no, people made these. And then the next step is, oh, I'm a person. Maybe I could make it. Was there a point for you, Sally, where that kind of seemed like a pathway?
Yeah, I mean, much the same as you. Like when I was a kid and reading Archie comics, right from the start, I noticed that there were the credits on the first page of every story, saying writer, penciler, inker. So right from the first times that I was reading comics, I was like, that's a job. I could do that. But yeah, probably when I was 6 or something. So they never seemed like magical to me, but because of that, they always seemed like something I could do.
So, and I mean, you've mentioned you've been kind of freelancing since you were 15. I mean, I guess, were you always drawing? Was that always a...
I've always been drawing, not always well. I've always been, I think, pretty much since I could hold a pencil, I guess. I've always been kind of drawing stuff, and I don't know, it's been, I'd probably say it's been the one constant in my life, no matter what. Even, I mean, a few years back I had some health issues and I was in intensive care for a prolonged period of time, and everyone was trying to give me, different kind of people's life stories in a book kind of thing. All I wanted was a sketchbook and a pencil, and my brother was the only person who listened to me and got me exactly that. That's kind of my barometer. If I'm drawing, I know I'm all right.
When did you transition from I'm drawing just for me, just for pleasure, something I love, to maybe I can pursue this in a kind of like a professional capacity?
I think I've always had that I've always wanted to do that since I was probably in my late teens, but it's only up until what I went through that kind of made me stop and kind of realize that, the time that we have is kind of, you know, no one's promised tomorrow, so you may as well just go for it. You know?
And I guess
if it makes you happy.
Yeah.
Well, I guess for all of you then, did you have any preconceptions about how the comics industry, for like, you know, air quotations, for lack of a better term, actually worked? What were the mechanics of making your book as you saw them?
I guess I kind of probably thought there were more industry norms in terms of processes and so on. As kind of one of the biggest surprises for me working professionally, I think, has been that literally every job and every person I work with does things slightly differently.
Well, Steve, was self-publishing always an option that appealed to you?
No. I mean, as I touched on yesterday, the self-publishing thing only came to me in 2006. Before then, it was always something which, it's interesting because from the outside, it's a bit like the whole thing with I find with comics. It's a bit like walking down the road and you pass somewhere and you're suddenly aware that there seems to be this massive party going on inside. You go, oh wow! And you've got two choices. You can either peer through the window and wish you were in there, or you could gate crash. And I gate crashed. And I think the thing is, when you gate crash, you're inside the party. Suddenly you become aware that actually this party may not be as. Maybe not everyone is having such a good time as they seem from the outside, but it's still a nice party to be part of. So I guess that's the kind of thing. So, you know, I think when you're looking at it from outside, it seems that everyone's having a great old time. Everyone's really happy. Everyone gets on with each other. All this kind of thing. But then once you're there, I guess you have more of the sense of the reality of it, and it's a business just like any other business. So there's good parts and bad parts, and you know there's personalities who get on and personalities who don't. But the common bond is the passion for the actual medium, and that's the really important thing. And I think that's what makes it distinct from somewhere that, you know, if you work in a bank or you work in an office or you work in a building site. Unless you get really excited about bricks, of course. But I mean, it's that passion for the item, the passion for what you're doing. And I think that's what makes a lot of creative arts very unique, and in particular comics extremely unique.
Ade, how did you find going from, drawing maybe for commissions and stuff, to actually being at a show or being at a convention with your own content?
I think I found the very first con I did, it was an MCM con. I was sharing a table with a friend of mine. It was his first con as well. So we were kind of essentially just vibing off each other in that respect. And yeah, it was I'll say it was quite an exciting experience, you know. It's kind of, as I was saying to you earlier, it's you know, you come away from, whenever you do a Comic-Con, you always come away usually with kind of a really positive energy, because you're surrounded by your contemporaries basically, and it just rubs off on you, and it's kind of, you know, you come away and you're kind of like, right, now I'm going to go and conquer the world kind of thing, and then 2 weeks later, yeah, it was definitely a positive experience. You know, it's haven't looked back. I think after that, it's very difficult to kind of do an event and not be on that side of the table, or want to be on that side of the table. It kind of really gets under your skin.
What do you think about the idea of breaking into comics, which is a phrase which is used a lot? And I guess what I was tempted to ask, how would you break into comics? What advice you would give? What I'm actually wondering is there a process of breaking into comics, or is this all some kind of illusion?
I don't think there is a single way of breaking into comics. You speak to 100 different creators, and they'll at least give you a different version of how they got there. I guess it comes down to what you actually want to do in comics. If you really, if your sole driver is what you really motivates you and excites you as a creator, you want to do superheroes and you want to do Spider-Man and Batman, that's perfectly fine. But then that process is probably more defined, because it involves, getting your work in front of those editors, pitching to them, and trying to get that work and get that recognition. But at the same time, there's so many different creators at so many different levels of comics, and ultimately it's finding what works for you. I think the one thing about comics, and it's very different from something, if ever you've written novels or you've tried to self-publish novels, that the comics community is extremely embracing of is if you're doing it yourself, and if you're a self-publisher. It could well have come historically from people like Dave Sim, with Cerebus, where it became something aspirational. Whereas in the novel world, fiction world, kind of self-publishing is looked down on as not a valid way of getting your work out there. So comics are very different from that, I think. So I think in terms of breaking in, it really boiling down to producing a bit of work and getting it out there. And these days, with the internet and social media, it is so easy to get your work seen. Yeah, it is so easy, and it's really down to you as to what you actually are looking to achieve as a creator. Because I think it's probably easier for anyone to kind of get into comics if they have the passion for wanting to get into comics than it ever has been before, because there's so many platforms available to do that.
Mm-hmm.
So, I mean, did a point come for you, Sally, where you suddenly thought, I've broken in, or I've...
No, I'm not a fan of that term at all. I think it's horrible, because it just gives this idea that there's like a finite thing that you can achieve, and then you're there, like one gate that you have to get through, and once you manage that, then you're there, and then you will be able to earn a living, and you'll constantly have an audience, and all of these things will just be fine. You just have to get to that point, which is like you're trying to crack a safe or something, and once you get in, then you've got all the money in the bank and all that kind of thing, which isn't the case at all. Like, regardless of how long you've been making comics, like 20, 30, 50 years, and regardless of whether you've had no books published or 50, like, everyone at any stage is still trying to figure out how to make a living, trying to figure out what they want out of their work, trying to figure out what's satisfying, and things change over time too. Like, you might get to the point where you've worked your way up and now you're getting books for larger publishers, but you realize it still doesn't pay enough to live on. that might happen, hypothetically. Or you might get to a stage where you're doing work and maybe you realize that those aren't the kind of stories that you want to be telling, and they're not the things you're passionate about, and then you have to recalibrate. You might get to a point where, you feel like your audience has gone down, even though you've been working a long time, and you wonder how to connect with people and reach people again. It's like a constant up and down that will just carry on as long as you want to be making comics. So I think thinking of like, how do I break in, is the wrong mindset, and it's more, what do I want out of comics, and what are some realistic ways that I can make that happen over the next few years. And then a few years later, you kind of have that conversation with yourself again and keep recalibrating so that it's not draining you, and it's something that you're enjoying and you're getting something out of.
Yeah, I think sometimes as well, perhaps it's more the perception of others about the breaking process rather than yourself. Because I mean, I don't know about you, but very often when they announce every year they announce that with the Eisners or something, that they have the list of nominees, and there's the best new talent. And invariably there'll be one or two names in there that have been around for years. So all of a sudden they're considered a new talent, So it seems to be more the perception of others. That's where it's down to.
Ade, I mean, what about yourself? I mean, how are you? I mean, you're working on a book at the moment.
I've kind of actually just been working on creating an audience for it, which I know it sounds a bit weird way of doing it, but it's this kind of it kind of seems to be working in its own weird way. So it's I mean, I've been doing, as I was saying before, I've been doing some events over on the continent as well, which I would strongly recommend. It's worth it. Even if you treat it as a busman's holiday, it's really just worth doing it. What I've noticed that they actually seem to prefer original artwork as opposed to digital artwork, which is a bit weird considering 70% of comic books are digital, so it's kind of in terms of how they're produced. But it's kind of worth exploring. It's a big world out there, It's kind of get out there and explore it, and take your work with you.
Well, I think one thing that's coming across is that there are so many different ways of doing comics, for lack of a better phrase. Have you ever seen a method you haven't tried yet, but one you really admire, or have you ever seen something and gone, oh yeah, that's something I want to emulate, or something I want to try?
And for me, it's easy to kind of come up with something which I wouldn't want to try, because I hate the Marvel method of the writing Marvel method. I've never tried that. I've heard about it, but I don't know. I think I find it a horrible idea to kind of just give someone 2 or 3 sentences, and then have to leave it to them to kind of work it all out, and then it comes back to you, and then you have to fill it all in. I don't know. I find that a really strange way of working, and a bit unfair to the artist as well, because it's the artist that's really doing the writing in that case. They're the ones that are telling the story. So yeah, so for me, it's easy to come up with something which I would want to do, rather than something I would like to emulate.
Well, Sally, any thoughts there?
Yeah, I haven't attempted to dip my toe into crowdfunding yet, because I've seen the kind of mountain of work that it is, and I feel like it'll probably be the right fit for some project at some time. But I am slightly terrified.
Ade, we talked about, are there things you haven't tried which you think might work well, or the opposite? Are there any hurdles you've come across, or things?
I think the biggest hurdle is the hurdle that pretty much every kind of independent creator comes across, which is, how do you keep yourself alive whilst you're kind of like making something happen? It's a hard balance, it's kind of I've started to explore Patreon, because which is it's a slow burner. It takes quite a while to build up kind of following with Patreon, but that's what, if you're doing different events, it's like just promote it as much as possible. Kickstarter is kind of one of those where I've been intrigued by it, but I just haven't. I don't know. I'm just not ready to take the plunge with Kickstarter just yet, because I want to have something kind of on the way to being completed, kind of there to then kind of like, yeah. I don't know. It's a weird one, because it's kind of, do you ask people to to kind of keep you alive whilst you're kind of making it, or do you just kind of like wait till you kind of finish the actual body of work and ask just for support with getting it printed? It's that kind of weird balance, because some seem to go for category A and some seem to go for category B, so it's kind of, I don't know how you kind of balance that.
The one I'm doing now is my 6th one, and it took me a long time to come around to the whole Kickstarter thing. For many years I was very anti-Kickstarter. In fact, I was at a con in Cardiff many years ago, when I was part of the debate team what was basically arguing against Kickstarter. I felt that strongly against it, and then all of a sudden I had a realisation that it wasn't the platform that I had a problem with, it was actually the way it was being used. And as soon as I had that kind of bolt, then my attitude to Kickstarter changed. So the way I approach it is never to ask for everything you need. So I use it as purely as a pre-order platform. So whether Kickstarter succeeds or fails makes no difference to actually the product coming out. The book will still be published. All the Kickstarter provides is a means for people to get the book at a cheaper price than it will be when it's sat on the table at the convention, which is another really important factor for me. But also be able to properly reward the people who've been so generous to pre-order it in advance. So my targets are low, so that I can try and add extra content and extra freebies in to the base package. So whoever supports one of my campaigns on Kickstarter will always get the better deal, because to me that seems to be the way that the Kickstarter should be, rather than where I've seen, and one of the things that used to kind of irk me with it was where someone asks for 25 grand to print a 24-page black and white comic, and then you have to spend £10 plus postage to get that comic on Kickstarter, and yet 1 month after the Kickstarter finishes and they printed it, it's on the convention table for £4 or £5. To me, that seems a completely arse-backwards way of doing it, and an insult to the people who are good enough to back in the first place. It's a bit like, I mean, the whole Kickstarter thing is a bit like in the theatre where you have theatrical angels, the guys who put up money to support the show, and they end up getting looked after. They're basically the VIPs, so they're invited to the premiere and all that kind of stuff. But to me, that's how Kickstarter should work, not the other way around. And I'd seen a lot of Kickstarters where it seemed to be engineered so the backers were actually getting the worst deal, and that didn't seem a fair thing to do. So that's, as soon as I had that kind of realization and how I could fix that, that's how then I approached my Kickstarters, and that's how I do my Kickstarters. And there's still never any guarantee, of course, because that's how the platform is. But it seems to, for me, it seems to work, and more importantly, it taps in to the international market as well, which is a really important thing to be able to tap into. And in the same way, you get at conventions, you get a regular readership. So, I could go, every year I go to Manchester, I have a few people coming back who always see it in Manchester, and they ask, oh, what's new this time? And they will buy whatever's new. What I'm finding on the Kickstarter campaigns, everyone is, they're following those campaigns. So even if it's a different kind of item, they will come back and they'll re-pledge to get that latest item. So that's how I use it. So it's how you use the platforms as well, I think, is really important.
When you first thought about making comics, did you ever imagine you'd have to do the business management side of things? Even if, because we had a lot of people here who are freelancing, we have a lot of people here who have day jobs, but it seems as though in addition to being creative and having that passion, you also have to learn a lot of other skills, like managing your time, your money, your finances. Sally, how do you find you balance the, professional, creative workloads?
It's taken me a lot of years to kind of learn to be realistic about it. Like, it's something that you always know is there, but it's taken me sort of years to kind of get to the point of when people say that if you're freelance, half your time will be on the creative work and half will be on all the other stuff. They're not kidding. It is at least half. So I think, a lot of it is just being realistic about timing, and that's been the most helpful thing to me. The nice thing is that anything, although it's a pain, and although for a lot of us it's not how our brains work, anything that you need to learn, you can learn, basically. Google will tell you. HMRC are surprisingly nice. You call them with questions and they will answer them for you, and they'll generally help you out. You need to find out about sort of contracts or something. You ask your peer group, or you join the Society of Authors and they'll go over contracts for you. Sort of, it's, I guess research is the main skill there, actually. Yeah, if you want to start producing comics and you're kind of like, I don't know what to do about like the admin and the money and all of that other stuff, like the best thing you could ever do is literally just spend a little while thinking about research. Or if you're in university or something and they have like a research skills class at the library, take that, because that's basically the one thing that you need to get you through, is just learning how to find out about things as they come up, because you can't learn all of it on the front end. You'll always be surprised by things.
Did you ever imagine there would be that much work to go with the art?
Absolutely not. Especially because sort of I have a couple of agents now as well, but mostly what they do is they basically negotiate so they can get my fees up a bit and get me a good contract that isn't harming me. They're not really sort of finding me work. You kind of, when you're growing up and you think about being an author as a career, you think of sort of those authors who put out book after book after book with the same publisher and work with the same editor for years and talk about how much they love their agent. So you kind of think, oh, you just need to kind of find the place where you fit, and then things will get easier. But yeah, that's not really the case. I think, especially now, I think the publishing industry's changed enough that everyone is having to be more flexible and wear more hats and do more things. You're not likely to find kind of one publisher who is your home and that's just where you stay and you just do the same thing. I think you have to be prepared to jump around a lot more. So I would say the workload on non-creative work has probably gone up versus 20, 30 years ago.
Ade, I was wondering if you could, or rather if your younger self could see you now, here in a room full of your peers, gazing admiringly at you, what do you think your younger self would think of how your pathway into comics has taken you? Do you think what's the expectation versus the reality? Put you on the spot there a bit.
Yeah, that has kind of put me on the spot. It's kind of
Okay, we'll tell you what.
okay. It's kind of I guess it's always kind of I think I kind of looked at it from when I was younger. I kind of looked at it as kind of it's always going to be a long journey anyway, and art is kind of a lifetime journey. So it's kind of, you know, you're going to have times where things don't go right, and you're going to have times where things work out wonderful. But yeah, I don't know. I've always, I guess, had a bit of a philosophical kind of outlook on it. So it's kind of sorry.
No, it's fine. I mean, Steve, how would your younger self look upon your achievements now?
Goodness. Well, my younger self was terrible. So to be honest, my younger self didn't have a clue. So I wouldn't really want to listen to what my younger self have to say. But
is there anything you would do differently? Do you think?
I think really. I mean, I started working in comics in the early 90s, and then I took a break from comics for 13, 14 years. Creatively, I was still reading comics and following comics, but I wasn't creating them. And really, I think I wish I could get those 13, 14 years back as a creator. Because I kind of think now it'd be interesting to be where I am now 14 years ago, if I could remove that and to see what a difference that makes. I mean, I've seen a lot of changes anyway over the time since 2006, since I've been actively publishing and creating comics. But those years where I went off and did something else, with the benefit of hindsight, it'd be kind of nice to still have those 13, 14 years of opportunity, I think.
Well, Sally, but what about yourself? How do you think, where you are now compares with what your expectations may have been when you first got into it?
I think my childhood self would be really stoked about some of the stuff I've got to do. Like when I was doing that job where I was drawing 140 animals, like I was thinking my 8-year-old self would have been like, I've been paid to draw animals? This is the coolest, wow. But I think my younger self would be surprised at how complicated so much of it is. I think I thought it would be a lot simpler. At the same time, it's kind of, everyone takes different routes, and you kind of think, oh, I would have done this differently, or I would have done that differently. But it's hard to kind of factor in how things affected you. Like partially when I look back on starting out in comics, it took me about 5 years to draw and write my first full-length book. And that was because I kept doing other things. Like I just said yes to everything. I participated in every anthology that came along. Anybody who wanted to collaborate on something, I was like, yeah, sure, let's do that. And it's not that I thought badly of my work, but I think subconsciously, somewhere in my mind, there must have been some part of me that kind of thought that wasn't ready to prioritize my own work above other people's, or to kind of say that my own work was as important and as worthy of time and as likely to get somewhere. So looking back, part of me thinks that I wish I'd privileged my own work sooner. But then at the same time, doing all of that stuff, even though a lot of it wasn't stuff that was really worth the time or went anywhere, it did give me a lot of experience working with other people, and that's a big part of my job now. So even that, maybe that needed to happen. It's hard to kind of say that you change anything, because then maybe you wouldn't be where you were now, and maybe it'd be somewhere better, but maybe it wouldn't.
Well, I guess a big question, and hopefully not too heavy a question for this early in the morning, but I was wondering, for each of you, what would success mean to you? Steve?
This is this killer question coming in back again from yesterday, isn't it? I think success is contentment with what you're doing and how you're doing it. Really, you can. I mean, I think all of us in the room are aware that comics aren't a quick way to financial success and riches. We all understand that. So I don't think really it's any of us would probably say, oh yeah, I want to earn millions from my comics. I don't think that's not in the ballpark. To me, it's having the satisfaction of feeling that you're producing something worthwhile, that is the best of what you can do, but also is something which people are engaged with and people like and people respond positively to. I think really as a creator, that is the key thing. And all of us will know that feeling you get when you've sold something to someone, and that feels great. But even better if you see them again and they say, oh yeah, I really liked that was terrific, when's the next one out, or when you're doing another print, or it's that kind of buzz that you get. That I think that's the key success for me. A couple of years ago I was at MCon in Nottingham, and it was a 2-day show, and on the Saturday I sold a couple of Flint Lock comics to somebody. I think they were about 13, 14, I think. And then when I came back on the Sunday, they'd obviously been in earlier, because on the table there was a little kind of post-it note in the shape of a little heart, which was this little review this girl had done of the comic and saying how much she liked it. And it was such a magical thing. It was and that meant more than someone spending £100 on comics at the table. Because that just showed you did something which made someone, they enjoyed what I did, and they thanked me for it, and I felt so successful at that moment. I remember that.
Ade, success.
I think it's pretty much going along similar lines there. It's kind of I think on one side of it, it's kind of always pushing your boundaries as an artist and as a creator, and kind of evolving. And I think on the other side of it, it's being able to do what you love whilst, even if it's just keeping things on the other side of life stable enough to allow you to do it. Yeah, you don't necessarily need to, although it's nice, you don't necessarily need to have kind of like lots of money in the bank or so on. You just need to be able to take care of the basics. That's all. Like, apart from that, then just be left alone to create, kind of thing. And kind of, it is definitely, an amazing feeling when people really like what you've created and really enjoy it, and the fact that it means something to them as well. So yeah.
Stanley, how do you feel?
Yeah, very much along the same lines. I would say it's kind of 3 things. So in terms of like what I'd view of really being a success is having your work connect with people, which is like what you were talking about, like having people say that your work sort of help them through something, or help them explain something about how they're feeling or what they experienced to someone else, or just kind of put words to something they're going through, or even just not feel like they're the only person going through something. I think that's massive. I think if you can have that, if you can have some emotional satisfaction and enjoyment out of your work yourself, and I mean that in a realistic sense, because comics are a massive grind, and I don't think it's realistic to be like, I sit down in a happy haze every day to draw, I'm so happy. Like, it's really horrible hard work, many, many days. But you're getting as long as you're getting something out of it, like there's a reason emotionally that you want, and it's bringing more satisfaction into your life than misery. If it's bringing mostly misery, then you reconsider things. It's not worth it. Bringing if it's connecting you with people and it's bringing some emotional satisfaction into your life. And financially, I've really kind of changed on what I think success is, because I think we're at the point now where, honestly, like 99% of the people making comics, it's never going to be their main income earner for them. So I think financially, success to me is just if you're able to get yourself into a position that you can buy yourself the time to do the work that you want to do, then you're fortunate and successful.
Yeah,
definitely.
Sally, just sticking with you for a moment, I was wondering if you could tell us a little bit about one piece of work you've done that you're especially proud of, and what it was about that work that shone. Or is it always the project you're working on right now?
It's tricky because, like, often it's in terms of like looking at artwork that I've done and being like, hey, that's really good. Like, it's always the most recent project because you're always improving. In terms of kind of feeling emotionally satisfied with the work, it's always the personal work. The tricky thing is that, like, I have 2 books that are completely written and thumbnailed. They've been edited. They've been through multiple thumbnail drafts, and I haven't found a home for them because the feedback from publishers so far has been that they're too quiet. Going back to quiet comics. So those I'm going to have to self-fund. And that's like, it's a tricky kind of thing to realize that the work that excites you most is the least commercial work that you make. But those works are the works that I'm most proud of. The works that are like a little bit strange and kind of odd feminist contemporary fairy tales. I'm considering taking the plunge and just investing a bunch of time in doing one of them in watercolor, because I would really like to do a full book in watercolor. And that's the kind of thing, like, you can't fund that at a publisher. That's nonsense. But it's one of those things where I've been doing a lot of commercial work for a long time, and I think you have to balance it. I have one editor who says her policy is one for you, one for me. So, like, one book that you think is commercial and is going to find a commercial audience, and balance that with then do a project for yourself.
Ade, is there something you're particularly proud of?
I guess the book that I'm working on currently is kind of it's taken a lot longer than it should have, but I think that happens sometimes anyway. But I've kind of found that I've grown as an artist whilst doing it, and the feedback I've received from some editors is the fact that I don't seem to hide from certain things that maybe some artists do. So I kind of, like the fact that I'm not afraid to experiment with things, and I kind of like, with each page, I just want to kind of try and keep pushing a boundary somewhere, whether it's visually or in some other way. Just kind of I guess it's also to give the reader something different as well. It's sorry.
No, it's fine. That's fine. I mean, Steve, any one piece of work you're particularly proud of?
The Flintlock work is my baby, so that's the one that I'm really kind of pleased with. But to drill it down further, which is not Flintlock, but it's a separate thing. One thing I was really proud of recently, and I will be for, I think, a considerable time to come, is that I did a short story for the second Little Heroes charity anthology, which is done by Aaron Rackley, I think it is. And so I did a story with that. I wrote a story with that, and it was the art was by Susie Gandon. It's lovely. But the nicest thing about that story was because it was a book that's aimed at younger readers. I did the story with my daughter Sasha, so we co-wrote the story, and that was such that was such a wonderful thing to do, to actually co-write this story with my daughter. And of course she's credited, obviously, she got full credit. So it's the first time I've collaborated with someone with another writer directly on a piece of work, and it's my daughter. And so I'm really proud of that. At the same time, she's only 8 years old, so the fact that she's getting her first credit at 8 years old, when I had to wait till I was, much older, that's a little bit annoying.
I was going to say, are you proud? But you don't want to get too cocky. It's like, oh, you're a good kid. But no.
But that was a lovely thing to do.
Well, cracking. I'll tell you what, I think we should maybe open it up to the audience. If anyone has any questions you'd like to put to our panellists here. We're going to go for Ned in the front.
Just obviously because you guys are talking about like freelancing, and you kind of work in different spheres, different spaces and stuff like that, and so you do kind of sort of get out there, you've got like contacts around and things like that, but I think it's really hard for a lot of people here to kind of like cut through the noise and like really promote their comic stuff and things like that. But say there was like a sort of soapbox or a platform you had that would go out to like, I don't know, like the Nation or something, everyone would hear it. What would you want to tell people about like the UK indie comic scene? Like what one thing would you really want them to know about it?
It's alive. It has a pulse. We're not dead yet.
Yeah, that it exists. I think I think at the moment, comics in the UK, there's so much going on. There's more going on than there ever has been. But it's hidden from the kind of, you have to dig down to find it. As soon as you've hit it, it's like an oil well. It just erupts, because then you realise how much there is. But you've got to drill down to find it. And I think so many people aren't aware that it's there. And I think having that awareness, so they can just get an idea of what's out there. I think that'd be a key thing, because I think unfortunately so often we still see the kind of people who kind of say, that comics there's no comics now anymore in the UK. Comics industry in the UK is not exist. It's dead. It's not nothing, and they're so wrong. It'd just be nice for people to have that awareness of how much is going on and how much wonderful work is being created, I think.
Yeah, I guess I'd probably want them to know how much community there is around comics in the UK. I think it's something quite special here. I think part of it is just geography. The UK is small enough that people can actually get around to things like this, so we can get to know each other in a way that you can't when you're spread over thousands and thousands of miles. But I think it's made something quite special.
Jenny, you had a question.
This is one for Ade. You said there was a convention or something where they preferred original art?
So that was actually Fancy Basil in Switzerland. So I did it for the second time. So I did it last year and I did it this year as well. And it's this was their third year. I think last year they had a turnout of 38,000. This year 50,000. Wow. It's 3 floors. Even has escalators. That's right, a Comic-Con with escalators. Right? Fancy Basil. So it's in Basel, Switzerland. It really is worth doing. It's kind of, there definitely is an adventure element to kind of doing Comic-Cons on the continent. Yeah. It can be a little bit on the costly side initially, and in terms of returns, it can be a bit tight with kind of breaking even. It's sometimes nice just to have a complete change of environment and just kind of be somewhere different outside of your comfort zone. And it's kind of, as I was saying, it's kind of like a busman's holiday almost. So it's kind of, it's a working holiday. But it's really worth doing, whether it's Switzerland or Paris or Germany, Belgium.
Finland as well, apparently is a really good one.
Yeah. It's like
Helsinki, yeah.
I think Stockholm as well has a really good one, which I really should go to. But again, there's so many around Europe, and we just know so little about them.
So I'm seriously contemplating doing Austria in November. and it's like €80 for the table
Wow.
without the bank fee, which they will charge you as well because you got to do it as a transfer. But it's kind of yeah. I've never been to Austria, so why not? It's like, you know, it's kind of. I know it sounds a bit weird, but it's kind of, it doesn't always have to cost the earth to do some of these events. So, you know, it's like you can either stay in Airbnb or you know. It's, although saying that with Switzerland, the difference between kind of like staying in Airbnb and staying in a 4-star hotel was literally kind of like about £80 for 4 days.
Wow.
So it's kind of, because it's an expensive country anyway, right? But it's kind of, yeah, it's a bit painful when you come back to the UK and you get your money changed. You're like, is that it? But it's more the experience than anything else. And also, you spread your work out there as well. It's kind of, you know, it's more people seeing your work is kind of part of it as well.
They're a lot more tolerant of rough sleepers.
I think maybe we've got one more time for one more question from Barry.
It's a question for all you guys, really. One of the things, I don't know how many people here are new to indie comics or looking to get a table for the first time and stuff like that. What are the tips that you would give to a new indie creator who basically they've bought their first convention table and they're going to be doing their very first convention behind the desk?
So that would be tips for new exhibitors at conventions.
Don't panic, really. I think don't panic.
Yep.
Is probably the first one. Enjoy it, and have realistic expectations. I think that's the key thing. I think it's all of us have been at that point somewhere in the past where we've done our first event, our first show. So we all know what it's like. And I think the key thing is to just don't, just enjoy that day or 2 days, however long you're there. But also take time to get to know the other people that are all exhibiting. Because I think one of the best things about the British comics community is how supportive we are of each other. I mean, I remember that when I first started, everyone was really supportive. I think that's where I first met Barry, but the very first time I was there. So, and throughout the whole time, that's been the constant. Whether it's a good year or a bad year, a good show or a bad show, that sense of support within the community is always there. So embrace that, embrace the community, and the community will embrace you back. Because we're always happy to share knowledge and advice and guidance, and if need be, just someone to listen to if you've had a terrible day. So don't work in isolation. Get to know everyone else around you.
And talk to your table neighbours as well. Definitely. You find that you can, some really amazing friendships also spring up from that as well. So, it's kind of nice to kind of be able to reach out to people, because sometimes it can be quite a lonely professional, if you're kind of up at like 4 o'clock in the morning working on something. And, usually the only people that tend to be up at that time are other people working on their own things as well, or insomniacs. It's like, or both. So, yeah, it's I'd say that, and also utilise social media a lot more. It's a tool. It's there's lots of negatives of social media, but there's also lots of bonuses with it as well, and especially in this day and age. It's like, use it to help you. It's like, promote your work, promote the interactions you're having with people. It's yeah.
Sally, anything?
I kind of definitely back that up. That kind of the most important thing is the people you'll meet at a con. I would say maybe don't focus on sales to the detriment of relationships. I think the relationships are the main value that you will get out of a con. I know it's easy to kind of get hung up on am I going to even make my table costs back and that kind of stress. So you can kind of just get you can get caught up in that. But honestly, there are some very design-oriented people who are incredibly good with merch and who actually do make a decent chunk of their income at cons. But I think for most people making comics, going to a cons aren't going to be like a huge part of your income probably, especially because you're putting in, you know, it costs money to print the books anyway, it costs your time to be there. So kind of the main value of cons is because you're building your network, and I don't mean that in a gross way, you're building your community, and that means work in the future, that means support from colleagues who are in a similar place to you, and it does grow your audience as well. And you know, I recommend people for work all the time, and going to cons for me is more part of just renewing and keeping up my relationships with those people, seeing, you know, what your colleagues are working on, keeping up to date with each other, seeing how we're doing, and just kind of just affirming those relationships and making some new ones. So yeah, I just focus on people. Don't be like super selling focused. Like, yes, have your one sentence pitch for your book that you can explain to people what it is, but don't just go into like hard selling mode the minute someone walks up to your table. Especially because you don't know, like, anyone who walks to your table, you don't know who they are. You know, they might be a future collaborator, they might be a future friend, they might be an editor, they might be a reporter. You know, they might be like your biggest fan in the future. Like, you don't know. They're definitely a person. They're a person who loves comics. They're interested in your work. So just focus on people and talk to them like people.
Lots of humour.
Well, sadly, I think that's all we have time for our first panel, but I hope you'll join me in a round of applause for our amazing panelists.